Hey everybody, welcome back or welcome to the Science of Gaming series. I'm Taylor Johnson, and in this interview we speak with Dr. Shona Halson. She gives a brief background in terms of her sleep and recovery research and consulting, and then dives into high-level concepts of sleep and recovery, and it really unpacks a lot of some of the misconceptions or maybe stuff that we had thought of and heard before, but drills into it and expands on it. We hope you enjoy and get a lot out of it.
Awesome, Sean. It's great to have you on.
Great to be here. Thanks, Taylor.
Of course, yeah. So, if you could you give a brief background on yourself and where you've been and what you're up to now, please?
Yeah, sure. So my area of interest is recovery and primarily sleep. So for the previous kind of 16 years, I've spent a bit of time at the Australian Institute of Sport. So I was heading up the recovery area there, and was lucky enough to sort of lead recovery at a couple of the Olympics for the Australian team. And then since about, when was it, 2018, I've joined ACU, Australian Catholic University, in primarily a research role. So still do plenty of work with elite athletes, with some consultancies and some research as well. But yeah, really looking at that recovery and sleep aspect when it
Awesome.
comes to elite performance.
Awesome. And you were also connected with the Gatorade Institute of Sports Science as well, correct?
Yeah, so I've done some work over the years looking with the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Also done some work recently with Nike as part of their Performance Council and their sort of research advisory group. So yeah, doing bits and pieces with some of the with some companies as well, which is nice.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you on. I've really enjoyed all of our conversations, and I know you have a lot of valuable information to share. So let's get right into it. So, I think first and foremost, to maybe give kind of a high level idea of sleep and recovery and components and why that's so important, and then kind of break it down a little bit.
Yeah, so I think what we're starting to see over the last, well, probably 10 to 15 years now is this recognition that it's not just the training that's important, it's, the other 20, 18 hours, however many other hours in the day you have that's not training. So we've always had this pretty strong focus on training, which we know is super important. But now we also recognise that what we do in the recovery period is also very important. And when you look at the time spent that's not training, sleep should make up a large component of that time. So I'm recognising that to build adaptation and to encourage, improvements in performance, we really need to take care of that recovery period, and sleep being one of the best things that athletes can do in that recovery period.
Definitely, and it's free. I mean, I always talk to people. I'm like, it is the most free and biggest bang for your buck performance enhancing tool that you can use. So can you talk a little bit about the mechanisms of sleep a little bit and just kind of give a brief overview of how that actually works, please?
Yeah, so sleep is really important for a number of different factors. So when you look at what happens during sleep, there's different things that go on both physiologically and from a brain recovery perspective. So with the different phases of sleep, you start out in sort of lighter phases of sleep, and then you go into deeper phases of sleep, and then you cycle through that numerous times during the night. And we know that for physical recovery, that the deep sleep is really important. So the stage 3 sleep. We also know that for the brain, the REM sleep is also really important. Both phases of sleep, both light and deep and REM sleep, they all have important things that go on in there. But when you generalise it, there's the deep sleep important for physical recovery, and the REM sleep for brain recovery. So what we tend to see is that if you miss out on either of those aspects of sleep, or you shorten them down, that there's some repercussions. And essentially, the other way that I think about it is, if you look at the body itself, and you look at the circadian clock that controls pretty much everything. So you have the master clock in the brain, but then you also have these peripheral clocks. And the peripheral clocks are involved in the immune system. They're involved in muscle repair. There's so many different aspects, and so sleep is obviously incredibly important and very linked to the master clock. And so there are things that are supposed to happen when we're awake, and things that are supposed to happen when we're asleep. And essentially, if you deprive yourself of sleep, something has to give. We were meant to sleep about a third of our lives. And so if you don't, then there's some potentially physiological and psychological repercussions to that.
Yeah, got it. So when you talk about the difference between REM sleep and deep sleep, and how if you miss out on one, it has implications. And I would imagine those two go hand in hand, right? So if you have a massive deficit in one and maybe just enough in the other, do they kind of, obviously they work together in conjunction, but how much do they really balance each other out?
Yeah, they do. Both aspects are really important. What we tend to see is the first part of sleep. Generally, if you were to have your 8 hours and you divide it up into two, the first half you would see has a little bit more of a focus on the deeper phases of sleep. The second half of sleep, you tend to have a little bit more of a focus on the REM sleep. You still get both in each half of sleep, but the focus is a little bit more different depending on which half you're looking at. And so what happens is we tend as humans to cut our sleep short. And so what happens is we miss more of that kind of REM sleep, which is what we'll see more in the second half. And we know that's really important for reaction time, for cognition. So that's really important for the brain. So when we shorten that, that's when, we wake up and we don't feel good, and we make mistakes and we make errors, and our reaction time is slowed.
Yeah, because what I was thinking when you were saying that is, okay, so it sounds like because there's disordered sleeping and there's sleep disorders, and there's difference, right? And it sounds like, if most people could probably do a good enough job getting the deep sleep, which is going to be more the physical, correct? And then it tends to be on the back end where they might miss out on the REM sleep, which is more for the cognitive. So I would imagine for gaming, for instance, some people will stay up super late and then they have a hard time getting to sleep, but they'll fall asleep, but then they want to get up at a certain time. So it's kind of shifting things around. And definitely thinking or looking at it from the perspective of getting the REM sleep for the cognitive recovery and performance, especially if it's going to go into reaction time, speed. And for them, it's speed, precision, accuracy, and reaction time. These are these four main components. Another thing that I'd like to ask you about as well is like chronotypes and understanding different, I guess I don't want to call it personality, but could you explain a little bit about chronotypes?
Yeah, so as I was sort of talking about our master clock, we do have, people have different chronotypes. So, and most people have heard of night owls and larks. So people, the night owl want to go to bed late and wake up late. Larks tend to go to bed early, wake up early. But then there's also the neutral type, which sits somewhere in the middle. We've looked at that in athletes, and we tend to see in the sports that I work with, we tend to see a predominance of larks, so early morning people, and sort of neutrals. That's we don't see a huge amount of night owls. I imagine with the athletes that you work with, you may see more of that, where there's the desire to go to bed late and wake late. However, in the adolescent age group, we know that this is that their chronotype is pushed back a little bit, so they look more like the night owl. So they don't want to go to bed late and wake up late. But yeah, I think that has interesting implications in sport. So if you've got a team sport and you've got mostly, early morning athletes, but then there's a few that want to go to bed late and stay up late, then that can be problematic. If you're working with adolescents who are wanting to go to bed late and sleep in late, but you got to get them up to go to train or to go to school, then you can obviously have some significant issues there. So it's easy to measure. Simple questionnaire, that morning, this evening, this questionnaire, so you can get a gauge of sort of where people sit. But I would say for the majority of athletes that I work with, they're early to neutral.
Yeah, I think especially because the age group for a lot of individuals who are starting the game, a lot of that's probably shifted a little bit more to later in the day, and they're going to want to sleep in a little bit later. And I think it becomes problematic because you then have organizations trying to create more of a structure, and they're trying to adopt so much of the traditional sport model as their structure. But again, those types of athletes are very different. Gameplay is different. Stress and cognitive demands and physical demands are very different. So it becomes a little bit tricky. So let's say that somebody does identify their chronotype, or they're trying to get into a good habit of building in good sleep hygiene and cycles. What would be some recommendations for an individual to do that?
Yeah. So great question. And I think part of the reason why it's such a good question is it's really a neglected aspect of the elite athlete. And, when we were saying earlier, sleep is free, sleep is cheap, it is easy for most people. We just tend to make mistakes. And so people want these sort of high-tech gadget solutions to something that's a really low-tech problem. And they want to spend money on ways to hack their sleep when they can simply just listen to the free advice, right? So instead of spending money, you can just look after your sleep hygiene and your routine. So having said that, there are some athletes that do have medical sleep disorders. We see a small amount of those. They need to be screened and tested, but for the majority, it's not having a good plan in place. So a good plan might look like going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. Now, that's one of the best ways to get good sleep. Can definitely be a challenge. It's easy to say, can be harder to do for many athletes, especially if they're playing or competing late at night and they have travel. There's all kinds of reasons. But if you can establish a really good routine with bed and wake times, whether you're a night owl or an early morning person, doesn't matter, establish your routine. I think you have to be wise with your caffeine intake. So we know that caffeine is, one, highly individual, but two, can have a negative effect on sleep. So working out what works for you from a performance perspective, but also helps you with your performance, but doesn't have a serious impact on your sleep, especially if you're competing day after day, and you're just getting more sleep deprived and more sleep deprived. So you have more and more caffeine during the day to try and get you through. So caffeine is one to watch. The other one to watch, I think, is just paying attention to the amount of sleep that you're getting. So what we tend to see is with social media and things like Netflix and obviously gaming, that what can happen is that just creeps into sleep time. And so the day gets longer and longer and the night gets shorter and shorter because we have all these things that we want to do. The other thing with phones and computers is the light that actually obviously hits the body clock through the eyes. And so we have to be really careful about the amount of stimulus we're giving from a light and a brain perspective in that period of time before sleep. What we like to do is have people winding down before they go to bed, before they start to take away the lights, take away the technology and just start to wind down. But a lot of people have these phones or computer games or whatever it is right before sleep. So if you can take some of those away before sleep, not to say don't do it, because we know that everyone's going to use their phone and everyone's going to use their computer and everyone's going to do what they're going to do. But if you can not do that right before sleep, you've got a chance. Like when I look at sleep diaries that we use in combination with objective monitoring, like with a sleep watch, I can look at a diary and if I see lots of caffeine intake and I see lots of phone use or computer use or bright light use before bed, I pretty much don't even need to look at the sleep watch. I know what I'm going to see. And so managing that is tricky, but I think is really important. So if you get your routine right, you're good with your caffeine, you kind of take your phone and your light away immediately before bed. The other one that can influence sleep is obviously stress and anxiety. Now that can be a trickier one to manage, but having some strategies in place, whether it's meditation or mindfulness, relaxation, whatever works for you, have something that you can go to in your toolkit when things get stressful. And everybody's life gets stressful for one reason or another at some point. So one of the things that we've done with athletes is we've measured their sleep and they're fine. They're quite good sleepers, but then, so they don't feel like they need to do anything, but then you put them into an Olympic village and it's incredibly stressful. It's a very unique environment. And so then all of a sudden they can't sleep, but they haven't got anything in their toolbox. They haven't practiced anything. So that they can cope in those high stress environments. So I think finding ways to manage stress, whether you're a naturally anxious, stressful person or whether you know that you could be in a situation coming up, I think that's really important too. The other thing from a sleep hygiene perspective is, just your bedroom, just a cool, dark and quiet bedroom. If obviously here in Queensland in summer at the moment, or just out of summer, but still hot, the sun gets up really early, it's bright. And so, if you need to have eye masks, if you're at a hotel and you happen to be near a lift, or it's really noisy, you need your earplugs. So just being a bit aware of how you can create your own environment, whether you're home or whether you're traveling, to make sure that you can block out some of that noise and light. I think that's really important. And the other thing is you can create a bedtime routine. So 3 things, or 2 or 3 things that you might do before bed every night, just to help get into that routine. The body begins to know what to expect. Okay, I clean my teeth, I have a shower, I read a book. Just say they're your 3 things. You do that all the time. The body knows, the next thing that's going to happen is sleep. So you can really start to prepare. And I often use the example of, I do like to read before bed. If on the weekend I decide to lie down and read a book, I may not even be tired, but I'll be like, I could easily fall asleep, because my body knows I'm lying down reading a book, it's sleep time. So I think you can be really smart in the way that you set up your pre-bed routine, so then you can take that wherever you go. Whether you're traveling, whether you're stressed, you've got something there that you can use.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you touched on so many great points there. I think the first one to circle back on is the toolkit. Having different tools available to you, because like you said, you may be a great sleeper, and if you get in an environment that you're not used to, you're no longer a great sleeper. And so being able to practice and have those tools in your toolkit to be like, okay, well, let me try this, or let me at least have, I guess part of this also ties back into the sleep hygiene, your sleep routine, because if you have that is part of your toolkit.
Yes.
And you could take that anywhere with you on the road. The managing stress part is key. I mean, I talked to numerous players about stress management and time management, because really the two go hand in hand. And really, if we think about it, I mean, everything is stress, right? And we are adaptable human beings, and we're going to adapt to it. However, it doesn't always mean it's for the best. And so being able to manage stress, and one of the things I always recommend is having individuals journal at some point towards the end of the day, to do a total brain dump, so that they no longer have to worry about it. They could always come back to it the next day.
Yes.
Because I myself have issues with sleeping where my mind will just race. But if I actually take out a piece of paper, write it down, I'm like, okay, it's there, I can come back to it later. That tends to help a lot. The other thing that you touched on, which I love, is really shaping your environment. It's whatever environment that you're in, the bedroom, you can definitely control to some extent, unless you have, a bunkmate, if you're on the road or something, but really do a good job of having your routines, again, the sleep hygiene that you can bring with you, and, shape your environment to really set you up for success. So again, that's turning off the lights, making sure it's a cool, dark place. I always try, telling somebody to get off the phone for an hour before bedtime is like ludicrous. So I say, look, give me 10 minutes. If you can do 10 minutes before bed, do some give me 6 deep breaths, turn off your phone 10 minutes before bed, journal for 5 minutes. That's a 15-minute chunk. Then you see how that helps. And I think what you touched on towards the end is the habit formation. Because if you get in the routine of doing that, just like when you lay down to read a book in the middle of the day, you get tired. You start to prime your body for these certain situations. And that's really what you want to do, I would imagine, when it comes to sleep.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. No, definitely that creating that routine, creating that environment. I am guilty as anyone else of, having the phone in the bedroom and being tempted to check it and waking up and going straight to emails. And, so I always now, when I get into bed, I always put my phone on airplane mode. Put on airplane mode, your alarm will still go off if you need it. And you're less tempted to try and look at your phone when you wake up. So I think, that's for me a nice strategy, in that I really try not to look at my phone in bed. I may look at it in the lounge room or whatever beforehand, but in bed, airplane mode, not being too engaged in it. And again, it's that association. The bedroom shouldn't be associated with the phone. The bedroom is sleep. The brain needs to know that when I get into bed, it's time to switch off. It's not time to be active on social media. And often, if you're working with people who have a big social media presence, and they're really busy during the day, the chance they get to post is at night. And it's like, well, that's probably not the best time to post,
Right.
because then you get the notifications and who's liking what and how many. And so
Yep.
if you're going to post during the day, bedroom is not for social media and the phone.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. So one of the questions that came up when we asked our users about sleep, what they wanted to know is the negative effects of poor sleep. And let's say I get 1 to 2 bad nights of sleep. Like how long does it take to make that up, and what are the impacts of that?
Yeah, great question. I think part of the reason that's a good question is because people can get, like, we know sleep is important and people can get really anxious and worried about it, which we know is not what should happen for sleep. So to give people comfort in that, 1 night of bad sleep, 2 nights of bad sleep, it's probably not the end of the world. We do tend to see, though, from a physical perspective, it probably takes you around about, 3 or 4 nights of reduced sleep, not full deprivation, but restricted sleep, to start to see a decrease in your physical performance. It takes, with reaction time and cognitive function, you usually, 2 or 3 nights, you're probably actually going to be okay. You just don't want people to get into long-term sleep deprivation. So what the body is really good at, and I'm sure most people have experienced it, is you have 1 bad night, the next night you get into a really good solid sleep. The body is really good at readjusting from 1 bad night. So that's why we, say to athletes, if it's a night before an Olympic final and you don't have a great sleep, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. We just don't want you having 6 months of issues.
Sure.
So that comfort in knowing that you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Awesome. That makes total sense. Okay, cool. So what I'd love to do is get, 3 big takeaways, maybe some stuff that we didn't really cover. If you were to offer some advice to, an aspiring professional player, or even just a casual player that just wants to really optimize their performance in the realm of sleep and recovery, what might be those 3 things?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and my favorite little quote, is to never stay up late for something you wouldn't get up early for. So what I mean by that is, people stay up and watch, say, an extra 2 episodes of Netflix. Would you set your alarm to an extra hour to watch 2 episodes of Netflix? You never would, right? So if you wouldn't set your alarm to get up early for it, don't stay up late at night, because you're cutting into your sleep, however you look at it. That's one that I really like. The other one is, it's a quote from a friend, a sleep colleague, whose name's Michael Gradner, and he says, we don't need high-tech solutions to a low-tech problem, which is sleep. So we tend to go to external things to try and fix our sleep, when really it's probably some things that we are doing ourselves. It's behavioural things, it's caffeine, it's not paying attention to sleep. It's usually simple things. So instead of going out and looking for complicated high-tech solutions, let's look at what we can do ourselves, and not go for the quick fix, go do the work. Do the work for yourself. So that's one that I really like, because I just find that people, want the quick fix, and there isn't really any quick fixes. And then I guess, the third one for me is really just around actually taking the time to do the work, to pay attention to this, to sleep, and recognise that it is something that can have profound effects on performance, by, we're not asking people to train more, we're not asking people to do more, we're just asking people to recover a bit more and to do the work on changing their behaviour. But tied into that is really, I guess, my third point is really around not just the athletes considering what they need to do, but us as staff that work around the athletes. What can we do? I sort of look at it, us and them. So them is, some athletes have bad behaviours, but what about us? What do we do? What time do we book flights for our athletes? Do we book them at 5 o'clock in the morning because we won't send them the night before? What time do we schedule training? If we have training sessions, do we need to do them at 5 o'clock in the morning? Because we know they won't sleep. can we create a good environment with good education and good strategies and simple ways of, when do we have team meetings? Do we have them at night? Like, so the other thing to think about is an us and them. And so what do we do to ruin athletes' sleep? What do they do? And then how can we help? How can we help create that environment to give them the best opportunity to get good sleep?
Yeah, I love that last point. I mean, all of those were great, but that last point, I think, really shifting the perspective and getting in their world a little bit around, what's going on for them, and then meeting them where they're at so that collectively everybody can be successful. I think that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, pleasure.
Where can people find out about you on social media or any sort of links?
The only one I really use is Twitter. So usually posting on there latest research, students research, upcoming projects, things like that. So it's just Shona Halson on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. I just want to acknowledge you for everything that you're doing in the space and really appreciate you being here.
Always good to chat.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Shona. I think she did a great job talking about the high-level concepts of sleep and recovery, the importance of sleep, and then creating the distinctions around rapid eye movement and deep sleep and why both of those are equally important. She then goes into the habits of good sleep routines and taking consideration about the caffeine consumption on a day-to-day basis and how that might impact your sleep and recovery. She also talks about the impact of stress and anxiety on sleep, and then time management and stress management tools. One of the big key takeaways here is shaping your environment for a better sleep. That's really important, and we definitely go into that at depth. I hope you all enjoy it. Be sure to check out the show notes and more content to follow.